It's great to speak with you today, Steve. It's been a while since we've talked last, and this is going to be an interesting topic on robotics assisted picking. But before we get into the topic, can you provide a brief background of yourself?
Thank you, Dustin. It's great to talk with you again. I am Steve Johnson, the managing principal of Johnson Stevens Consulting. We are a boutique consulting firm that operates across the United States and across the world, providing supply chain solutions consulting to clients in retail, wholesale, consumer products, and also business to business. And a lot of our focus is on e-commerce, digital type distribution and fulfillment that's occurring at the time. And there's a lot of exciting things that are happening in the field, even from when we talked about this 2 years ago.
Alex, so can you talk about what are the developments in automated picking for distribution centers as well as fulfillment centers?
So a key thing that we talked about last time that had accelerated a lot of interest in robotic assisted picking, which is essentially how do we augment the picking process so that the individual that's picking doesn't end up doing a tour of the warehouse and over again and end up with low productivity rates as a result of that. And so what's happening in the industry is that last fall, just a few months ago, Amazon announced that they were raising their minimum wage immediately to $15 per hour. When we last talked, there were several states that were doing that, but now this has happened de facto all of a sudden, and that's causing a lot of our clients to address this because they have a lot of people in the $10 to $13 per hour range, and they've got to get them up to 15 pretty much immediately. But that also means that they're accelerating their evaluation of things such as the automation in the fulfillment centers and distribution centers, and that includes robotic assisted picking, which has come a long way. There are several companies out there that are doing this now, and it's been implemented in dozens of distribution centers. And essentially what it is essentially a robot that roams the aisles of, it works well with a company that has a lot of SKUs or a lot of items. And they essentially place a light on the location where something's to be picked from, and then a light flashes on the robot itself, beckoning the picker to come and put those number of items into a tote or a carton. They can pick multiple orders at a time. The multiple totes or cartons fit on the robot. The robot doesn't run into each other, doesn't run into people, doesn't run into each other. It navigates well through the aisles, and it's a fairly low-cost solution. And also a development that's been a big deal here in the U.S. is with seasonality, especially with retailers and e-commerce retailers and wholesalers, is the fall can sometimes have a peak to average ratio of workload of as much as 9 to 1, or in some cases higher, probably averages 5 or 6 to 1 during that October, November, December timeframe. And these robot houses that have developed these devices are willing to short-term rent them, not so much lease them, but rent them just for the peak period. So if someone's not faced with having to buy a lot of robots just to handle the peak and then having them just sit around during the off time. We found picking rates versus someone picking in multiple cartons or multiple totes to a cart. We found at least a 100% improvement. So in other words, doubling of the pick rate using the robotic assisted picking devices that are out there and in the industry.
Is there any other reasons why it's becoming more attractive today? Has anything changed?
Yeah, there's some technical things that have changed. One is obviously the software and the control systems have caught up with processing speed and power, computer power, to be able to make this feasible. And then on top of that, the pursuit of what we call the holy grail in supply chain is, can we place a robot on a pick line? That would be the next step beyond just picking from bin shelving or rack, in a distribution center. Can we actually place it on a line, a flow rack line, or something such as that? side by side with people and do some of the picking during that peak period, or during those times when you need the labor and you can't find the labor, or if you find the labor, it's too expensive. And so the holy grail there has been, can we find a robot that can pick two very different items that sit next to each other in flow rack? Could be very big, could be very light, could be very heavy next to it, could be very small. And we're finding that there's several robotics companies that have made great headway just in the last 6 months in being able to develop that grabbing ability and then turning and putting it into totes or cartons. So we're almost getting to the point, I think next year, this time we'll probably have some very exciting things to talk about regarding that. And that obviously helps companies, because if they can't find the labor, and the labor is expensive, and the capital and the labor and the space that goes into that calculation of return on investment produces something very positive for the robot solution, then this is a way for them to be able to operate. We have one client in particular that's looking at this, and it would cut their requirement from 800 full-time equivalents or people, if you will, associates, down to around 500 people to pick merchandise, in a fulfillment center, which is quite a save, and quite exciting. It is an unintended consequence, because we're seeing, because of that, there's going to be fewer people obviously employed in these fulfillment centers. But I think the upside to that is those that are going through technical schools, those that are going through training in high schools, if they're very technically inclined with computers, which young people are today, they will have a future, because they'll be working with these types of devices, and there will always be a need to have people that will be working with the devices and directing the devices and also interfacing with these devices. So I think there'll be upgraded jobs available. There'll just be probably fewer of the mundane jobs that are going on in the fulfillment centers and distribution centers across the world.
And have there been any technical advances with the solution?
Yeah, so the technical advances, I think, have been millisecond kind of responses, being able through a wireless network to communicate with the robotics, and have it respond as quickly as a person, which has made that very technology, both hardware and software and processor speed have enabled that. And that has driven the cost down also of the warehouse control systems that run these robots. And so the robots, in these cases, can be a 5-figure number, in terms of US dollars for a robot. And obviously it can work 2 or 3 shifts if you want it to work that. So the numbers portend, very, very strong return on investment on an after-tax basis. It's helped too, because the corporate tax rate in the U.S. in particular is now been lowered and cut in half, basically, versus what it was. So more of that savings goes to the bottom line for companies, and helps those e-commerce companies compete. And everybody is competing right now against Amazon, and that's just reality. So they've got their own set of robots, which are really the prior generation type robots from when they acquired Kiva Corporation, but they're also working on these other robots as well, and so they're not going to stand still either. So companies have to adjust, but those technical advances have really helped bring this into focus, and helped people actually deploy these solutions instead of just talking about them and testing them.
This is a great topic today, Steve. Did you have any final comments you wanted to make?
Yeah, just a couple. It's affected some other automated systems. We're seeing some automated storage and retrieval systems, which in the past might not have been real popular, or might not have penciled out really well on return on investment. We're seeing some of those come down in pricing with their control systems as well, so that we can, for larger scale applications, actually generate some really good return on investment. And the control systems work really well technically now. 15 years ago, we were kind of scared to put in ASRS in a lot of situations where it was fairly complex. Now there's less of that hesitation out there. And then I think the final point I'd like to make is that there's third-party logistics companies across the world who have been lower tech, typically, rack and workstations and maybe a little bit of conveyor, maybe some sortation conveyor if they put a little bit of money into it for their clients. And there's several of them here that are actually using the robotic assisted picking because they find that's more affordable for them. And that also obviously has those advantages of the productivity improvement. So we're seeing third-party logistics companies step up and spend some capital on this because it really makes sense for them also.
And thank you again for sharing today.
Well, thank you, Dustin. We appreciate it and look forward to the next time we talk.